The law of identity states that everything is identical to itself. So for every A is equal to A. I am I, this table is the table, the state is the state, capitalism is capitalism, socialism is socialism. The law of non-contradiction states that everything is not other than it is. So for all A is not non-A. I am not you, this table is not that chair, the state is not society, capitalism is not socialism. The law of the excluded middle asserts that every property is split into two mutually exclusive classes, all things into a class of those possessing the property and those not possessing it. So for all A and B, A is either B or not B. I am either human or not human. Every object in this room is either a table or a non-table. A society is either capitalist or non-capitalist. These laws, for us, are fairly obvious, but the conscious formulation and application of them was an immense achievement in human history. That being said, however, at the same time, a moment's reflection just as obviously puts every one of them into question. For example, of course I'm myself, and of course I was myself yesterday. Yet my today self is not exactly the same as my yesterday self. I have grown slightly older in the meantime, have been subject to small changes, probably both mentally and physically. And of course, this table is not that chair. Yet not long ago, both this table and that chair may have been part of an uncut tree. And certainly a human is a human. But at what point did a human become a human and stop being a Neanderthal or some other development along the evolutionary chain? Of course, society must be capitalist or non-capitalist. But are we to suppose that since today there is no socialist society, that it logically follows that there cannot be one? Of course, every working class must be either revolutionary or non-revolutionary, and since today the Irish working class are not revolutionary, are we to suppose that they cannot be revolutionary? So clearly our laws of formal logic are much too sweepingly formulated, and therefore certain restrictions or qualifications must be applied if they are to be valid. The first such restriction is that we ignore time, history, and change. So therefore the I that is I, or the table that is table, are not the I of yesterday or the table as it was during the long route from the tree in the forest to the finished table in this room. And of course, the fact that there has never been a socialist society, it does not follow that there cannot be one. A new possibility has entered the world with the development of capitalism and the Russian Revolution, so that now non-capitalist can no longer be identical to pre-capitalist. And in addition, as the concrete analysis to the development of capitalism shows, which is what Marx's Capital performed, this new possibility is not any undefined non-capitalism or pre-capitalism. It is a specific determined possibility, i.e. socialism. It is, in effect, the determinate negation of capitalism. This is what dialectical logic refers to in the phrase the negation of the negation. To return to our A and B formula, the negation, revolution, of non-A, capitalism, relative to pre-capitalist social formation does not necessarily lead to the re-establishment of A, pre-capitalist formation, but instead to something new. And at the same time, this new, the result of revolution, is not any indefinite or unpredictable state of affairs without connection to the existing state of affairs, capitalism. It is itself the determinate negation, socialism, of the existing state of affairs, capitalism. And it is determinate because of the fact that it is the self-negation, the negation arising from within the existing state of affairs itself, i.e. the developing capitalist crisis and the consciousness and power of the proletariat and its allies. The second qualification on the applicability of formal logic is in a way a special case of the first. It involves the relation of the knower or thinker to the thing he knows or talks about. It is that the knower must be totally passive with respect to the thing. The knower must not change it or affect it in any way, because once the knower is active towards the thing becomes often change, and therefore the first condition, the extraction from time, history, change, is violated. Or, to put it another way, the rules of formal logic would apply with complete certainty only to things that could be known through pure contemplation. Their validity would imply a total separation of theory from practice. Against this stands the dialectical insistence on the unity of theory and practice. Now, the third qualification applied to formal logic is a generalization of the first, the necessity to abstract from time, history, and becoming. It is that we ignore all relations of the two other things. So, for example, spatially, this chair is to my left, but to the right of someone sitting opposite me. Left and right contradict each other, however, so we must exclude that chair's spatial relation from the consideration of it. Or we must set an absolute point of reference, me for example, and therefore say that that chair is truly to the left. It only appears to the person sitting opposite to be to the right. All relations involving time, like causality, are of course excluded by the first qualification, the extraction from time, history, becoming. But even seemingly logical relations must be denied, and the terms of their relations separated absolutely from each other. Appearance, for example, is one category, reality is another, and never must they be permitted to contaminate each other. Quantity is one thing, quality something wholly other. But if we are to be completely rigorous and follow the laws of formal logic to their ultimate conclusion, we would even have to ignore the relation of the thing to its own defining characteristics, to its own species and genus. So if we were to say this is a chair, we would in fact be asserting A is non-A. Strict application of the rules of formal logic would basically require the limitation of discourse into an endless tautology, such as a chair is a chair is a chair is a chair. It would in fact even preclude such a tautology by the mere form of the statement, a chair is a chair. A distinction between the chair and itself is asserted, or A is non-A. So, as we can see, the formal law of non-contradiction actually contradicts its own form. Against this denial or ignoring of relation stands the dialectical logic, which confirms the unity and interpenetration of opposites, basically the involvement of each thing in other things. Appearance and reality are not separable, each is only relevant to the other, and they are constantly transformed into one another. Quantity and quality are not indifferent from each other. Quantitative changes accumulate, a new quality suddenly emerges. Any theory or method that is shaped by the principles of formal logic must have certain attributes all closely associated with the denial or becoming of change. What it will tend to do is isolate certain categories or elements from each other and treat their interconnections secondary, as mere appearance, while locating their reality or essence in some sort of abstract universal. It will tend to treat change like as mere appearance and interpret a new state of things as either the returning to some previous state or the emergence in appearance of some eternally existing reality which lays behind the appearance. Or in its most radical form, it will tend to treat change as an absolute catastrophe, as the emergence from nowhere of a state that has nothing to do with anything that has gone before. It will also tend to treat some existing forms or structures as unsurpassable limits to human activity. It will tend either towards positivism, basically the view that the existing world of fact is all that can or ought to be, or towards moralism, the view that there is some realm of value that transcends any possible world of fact. Above all, it will deny reality of conflict or contradiction, because the elements in a conflict are not just different from each other, they are absolutely opposed to one another. Yet, at the same time, in order to be in conflict, they are intimately involved with each other, even to the point that the very existence of each depends on the other. The capitalist class and the proletariat, for example, periodically face each other, not just with different interests and needs, but in a potential war of annihilation, yet the existence of one depends on the existence of the other. There can be no capital without a mass of expropriated labor power, a proletariat to exploit, and the moment the proletariat seizes the means of production and thereby liquidates the capitalist class, it begins the process of its own deproletarianization, the transformation of itself into an association of free producers. A and non-A, in the case of real contradiction, are in no way separable. They are in fact so involved in each other's existence that we must assert A is non-A. Formal thinking, on the other hand, always assumes conflict as mere appearance in some sort of all-encompassing universal harmony. Now, another aspect of formal logic that is worth mentioning is that when it is formulated into a philosophy, it always results in philosophical idealism, even when the intention of the thinker is to assert a materialist worldview. There are numerous historical examples of this. Formalism, as I have tried to explain, involves or reflects the conception that only unchanging, non-temporal and self-sufficient things are truly real, but also that it is ideas that possess these features that formal logic takes as essence. Products of thinking, therefore, are taken for the only or ultimate reality. Where this sort of identification of thought and being, of idea and reality, are consciously affirmed by the thinker, the result is an open idealism. The world as a whole is regarded as the product, the construction of some mind, either my own individual mind, or some social or collective mind, or some divine mind. Where the thinker is not conscious of this identification, the result is a hidden idealism, which characterizes all pre-Marxian materialism. For example, to go back to our ancient Greek dialecticians, who correctly conceived the world and everything in it being fundamentally made up of tiny little molecules, atoms essentially. But even here, the atoms are regarded as the self-sufficient or unchanging entities, precisely the product of mental activity, which were taken to be the ultimately real. Dialectical materialism, with its conscious insistence that knowledge is essentially approximation and that the mental product of material reality in an ongoing historical process of knowing, is the first consistently materialist theory in history. Formal or metaphysical thinking is characteristic not only of ancient and medieval thought, but also of modern bourgeois philosophy. It has become less drastic, more subtle, but in some respects perhaps even more passive and firmly anchored in the deepest levels of ideology. We see this in all forms of modern philosophy, from existentialism, functionalism, pragmatism, and of course most blatantly in postmodernism. One thing that is clear, such theories from start to finish are profoundly anti-revolutionary. They assert that revolutions are just not supposed to happen. They view these events as accidents or as something that was technocratically manipulated. To understand such things, we need a method of thought that approaches the world as historical, as a reality that has changed and is changing, and that is thus changeable. For this, we require a method based on the recognition that all knowing arises in practice, and when this relation is suppressed or obscured, knowledge is transformed into illusion. We need a method that leads us to look behind every abstraction, every product of thinking, for the material base of it in human activity. For this, we need a method based on the recognition that there is no eternal, unsurpassable limit on which human beings may achieve for themselves, and that therefore instructs us to search for and identify the real material forces of change that have developed within the existing order. For this, we need a method that leads us to look for real contradiction, to analyze it in the most concrete possible way, to intervene with whatever power we may possess on the side that represents the negation of the negation, the side that is the bearer of the qualitatively new in the world. This, in a sort of abstract sense, is what dialectical materialism is, the only consistent dialectic and the only consistent materialism.